Thank you all for joining us for another Sips in Science, which here at the Center for Brain Health. And as some of you may know, and some of you may not know, here at the Center for Brain Health, we are all things centric to brain health, which is a higher level of healthcare than when you think of mental health or disorders. We're all about proactive care of your brain health, keeping your healthy brain healthier longer. And it really applies to so many things. And tonight we're going to talk about it in terms of leadership and character. So we have great guests tonight. I'm going to let Jen introduce them. But what I'd like to do is share with you a couple of quotes that I think are apropos for tonight. One is, it's kind of interesting. I don't know whether to attribute this quote to Jack Welch or John Quincy Adams, because they both claim it. It's about 150 years separating those two. But the quote is, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, and do more, you are a leader. And another one that I love is by Simon Sinek, who's a inspirational author. He's written many books. And he says it this way: authenticity is about imperfection. And authenticity is a very human quality. To be authentic is to be at peace with your own imperfections. And the great leaders are not the strongest. They are the ones who are honest about their weaknesses. The great leaders are not the smartest. They are the ones who admit how much they don't know. And the great leaders can't do everything. They are the ones who look to others to help them. Great leaders don't see themselves as great. They see themselves as human. And great leaders don't try to be perfect. They try to be themselves. And that's what makes them great. So in that regard, Jen Zients is a great leader. So we're proud to have her on our team. And I'm going to turn it over to her to introduce our great guest speakers.
Thank you, Steve. So for any of you that are new to Sips in Science, and for those of you that are seasoned attendees, I just wanted to remind you that we are going to be having presentation, and then please feel free to input questions into the Q&A, and we are going to get to those toward the end of the evening. And but Steve and I are really gonna serve as your moderators tonight after we get to hear from General Caslen and Dr. Matthews. So without further ado, we are really thrilled tonight to have both retired Lieutenant General Robert Caslen and Dr. Mike Matthews, both of whom have really distinguished, extensive bios. I am not going to read all of these to you. I'm giving you some of the high points that I think are particularly interesting and relevant here. So let's start first with General Caslen. I just want to give you this brief bio. He has a very long, distinguished career as a leader. As an Army officer, he has served all over the world, commanding troops, Operation Desert Storm, Operation Uphold Democracy, the war in Afghanistan, the Iraq War. He has received numerous civilian and military awards. His leadership also, it extends beyond just commanding troops, but also into academia and into university settings, where when he was at West Point, he developed an integration between Army applied problem sets and West Point research and intellectual capital. So this combination, I've gotten the pleasure to work with different DoD groups, and the behemoth of a military institution and the behemoth of academia. To be able to find partnership and leadership in both is very impressive. So Dr. Matthews is a professor of engineering psychology at West Point. And his career too includes service to this country. He's a former Air Force officer. He's on the Science Advisory Board for the Military Child Education Coalition. And he also served as president of the American Psychological Association's Division of Military Psychology. His research interests includes positive psychology applications to these military contexts, resilience, and character and human performance in combat and other types of dangerous contexts. He's published extensively in books and articles, and he and General Caslen have recently published, they've co-authored this terrific book that you can't really see it, sort of, here it is. I've read it, called The Character Edge, Leading and winning with integrity. So with that, Dr. Matthews, I'm going to let you lead off.
Okay, well, first I just have to thank everybody, you all, for hosting me and letting Bob and I talk to you a bit tonight about the science and application of character. It's a topic's very, very near and dear to us. And Sandy, especially thanks for your long-term friendship and setting this up. I wanted to also say that, you know, this is going to be a much better talk because Bob's here with me. I'm a mere scientist and teacher and professor, and a lot of times scientists and teachers and professors can be pretty pedantic and focused on narrow stuff. And what Bob will bring to this discussion is a broader and richer context. But I'm going to kick this off, though, by giving you just a little bit of information on sort of the science of character that I've conducted over the last almost 20 years, and try to sort of illustrate, sort of what the status that science is and maybe what the road ahead may be, and identify some gaps and satisfy the scientist here in the audience. And then we'll get transition over to Bob's piece. So the next slide, please. So I've been at, back, there we go. So I've been at West Point now for 21 years this month. I finished 21 years here. Before that, I taught at the Air Force Academy, so I've got probably 24 years teaching at National Service Academies. And I'd say, one of the most remarkable things I've observed in all these years, over 2 decades, is that cadets almost never fail because they're not smart enough. So I've had a lot of, my fair share of cadets who've entered West Point that I've known who've not graduated for this reason or that. It's almost never, virtually never, in my experience, never, because their SAT scores did not support the ability to succeed in the academic program or the other things we teach at West Point and require of our cadets. Instead, success or lack of success is due to non-cognitive factors, and these can be a lot of things. Some of them are pretty straightforward, be easy for anyone to understand. These are what I call physical or below the neck health. So they tear up a knee, injure themselves in some way that prevents them from serving a career in the Army because of physical limitations. Less frequently, but tragically when it happens, sometimes they suffer a traumatic brain injury of some type of concussion event or series of concussions. It's being in the military is kind of a high contact sport, one could say. That can cause problems. More generally, people, I think, not just at West Point, but elsewhere, you may share the same observation in your own domains. Failure is not always due to cognitive things. In fact, often is not. Sleep discipline, nutrition, physical fitness, all of these things also contribute. But what I'm finding in my research is that more often than not, character is a contributing factor in most of these cases where people fail to succeed in what their goals are. Whether it's just graduate from West Point and be an Army officer, or to serve in other highly selective, high-performing organizations, which many of you are part of. Next, please. So I'll just take a few minutes here and talk about the science of character, and I'm going to give you a little bit of. I'm starting a timer here so I can keep track of myself. Okay, I'm going to just give you kind of the tip of the iceberg of the science that's been going on the last 20 or 25 years. I would tell you that the rigorous science of character really began in the last 25 years. It had existed in psychology to some degree before that, but it's really taken off exponentially with the advent of what's called positive psychology, which was founded in 1998 by the eminent psychologist Martin Seligman of the University of Pennsylvania. So a good science of anything, including a science of character, should have a number of characteristics. And one of these is a good, strong conceptual model or models. And we have several good conceptual models of what character looks like, and I'll pick one to share with you in a little more depth here in just a moment. So I think we can check if you keep a checklist, the science of character is doing pretty well on conceptual models. A second a second attribute of good science, or the ability to have operational definitions of key variables. So can we operationally define character and elements of character in ways that can be measured? The answer to that is yes, we can do better, but we do have valid and reliable assessments of character that scientists can use to measure it. There's always the almost pull between internal and external validity when you're doing research. So internal validity is great, but if it doesn't apply in the real world, then the ultimate value of that science is compromised. And I think you'll hear a bit of this in tonight's discussion. You can think of me as being the sort of the internal validity guy, and General Caslen as being the external validity person in our team. I talk about the science and he talks about the application. And then finally, any good science, including that of character, needs appropriate methodologies and analytic tools. So what really spurred me to include this slide was somebody asked me about 2 weeks ago, is there really a science of behavior? And I thought, well, yeah, but let me think about it. And as I thought about it, I think the answer is yes, for these reasons. So next, please. So the conceptual model I just want to use as our working model tonight is called the Values in Action model. This was developed by Dr. Seligman of the University of Pennsylvania and his colleague, Dr. Chris Peterson, who's since passed away, but Chris was at the University of Michigan. And together they put together a very thorough literature review of not just scientific studies of character through the years that psychologists have done, but also the works of philosophers, the great religions of the world, literature. I mean, and they left no stone unturned in trying to identify what are the attributes of character, the strengths, the particular ones that are valued not just in the United States, but in cultures across the world, both contemporary and historically. And here's what you see in front of you is what they found. And so using, beginning with a very large number of items and using factor analyses and so forth, they sort of did their analytic magic and came up with the idea there are 24 character strengths that are universally valued among human beings. And they found that these 24 strengths clustered into 6 sort of silos, if you will. And this becomes an important point in a thought or two as we progress this evening. And they called these silos the moral virtues. And within each moral virtue, there were from 3 to 4 to up to 5 specific character strengths. Now, obviously, I'm not going to read you all of these, but if you look, for example, I'll just pick out 2 or 3, under the moral virtue of wisdom and knowledge. So they're saying that across the planet, everybody, whether you live in Korea or Bulgaria or Canada or where I'm from, Southwest Missouri even, you value things like creativity and curiosity and perspective and love of learning. And then the second moral virtue is courage, which includes things like bravery and persistence, which I will equate to grit. We'll say more in depth about grit here in a moment. Integrity can include that. Honesty, because honesty really is a strength of courage. It's the courage, it's the moral courage to stand up and say and do the right thing at the right time in the right place. So continuing across you see strengths of justice from the moral virtue of justice, teamwork and leadership and such. Strengths of humanity, capacity to love and kindness, temperance. How we are we forgiving and modest and prudent, and self-regulation is an important one. And then strengths of transcendence, like the ability to really appreciate a beautiful sunrise and thankfulness and gratitude for the good things of life, and optimism when things maybe aren't going so well, and of course, spirituality. So I said I wasn't going to read them all, and I probably read most of them. I apologize for that. Okay, next, please. So I'd also add, you can stay on this slide, that's fine, but the attributes of a good science, the characteristic of good science, there's also measures. So not only did Seligman and Peterson come up with this taxonomic scheme or classification scheme, they came up with a highly valid and reliable assessment for each of the 24 strengths. And that's called the Values in Action, or VIA. If you may want to take this, you can take this test online. It's really quite interesting. The Values in Action Inventory of Strengths. And if you want to take that, you just put, take the strengths test or take the Values in Action test, go into Google or whatever your search engine is, and you'll pop up way and do that. It takes about 15 minutes to complete. And you'll get a score from your highest strength to your lowest strength. Now, it's not a raw score. It's just a rank ordering, and allows you to kind of see where your strengths may cluster. Or you tend to be more of a wisdom and knowledge person, or more of a temperance person, or your strengths kind of spread across. So I thought that was an important point. Now, the slide I'm on now is the importance of all this is that these character strengths combine and interact together to produce this inner circle, which is a life of pleasure, engagement, and meaning. So our research from my lab and from lots of others across really the world, because people are studying this internationally, find that to the extent that you optimize some of these strengths, your at least the ones you're highest in, and learn to intentionally leverage them to overcome obstacles and challenges and deal with adversity and to achieve long-term goals, that leads to a life of pleasure and engagement and meaning. It makes for the good life. So this slide, this graph shows the individual strengths in the outer ring feeding each of the 6 moral virtues, which then feed into the middle. Now, I'll say a bit more about this perhaps, but one thing to think about is to consider your own individual strength profile as being like a toolbox. So you've got 24 tools in this toolbox as displayed here. And depending on the type of problem you might be facing at a particular time, you can pull out a hammer or a wrench or a saw or a screwdriver, by analogy. It's most appropriate to that particular problem. So next, please. So the reason I really adhere and use this particular VIA model is I like the concept, Peterson and Seligman's concept, that character is multidimensional. It's not just honesty. It goes beyond that, and it raises an interesting question in that I say that a lot of times when cadets fail to complete West Point, it can be due to a character issue, but not necessarily a character failure. So some people may just have a profile of character strengths that lend themselves to success in areas that are not in the military, for example. And when they move from West Point into another domain, another university or some other pursuit, they may still excel and flourish. So the advantage of this model of having 24 strengths, I think, is one of its most powerful components. And coming back to this concept of the toolbox. So do think that different strengths and clusters of strengths are related to these different outcomes in life. So think your own life, when you're trying to achieve a work-related goal or a school-related goal, you may draw more on your strengths of wisdom and knowledge and less on the others. But when you're facing a crisis of health in your family or some adversity that like the pandemic, for example, then you may need to pull from these other moral virtues and the strengths that support those. Now, Bob and I, sometimes we talk about strengths as being categorized as head, heart, and guts. There's those that have to do with your thinking and modulate, use of your IQ and those powers. Strengths of the heart, which are those of love and kindness and so forth. And strengths of the gut are things more like grit. So moving on. So I'm just going to dig in kind of quickly to, and as an example of the work we're doing at West Point, in this case, grit. Most of you have heard of this. If you've not read Angela Duckworth's book, The Power of Grit, still not that old, 2017, read it, man. It's great. It's a great book, and it summarizes a lot of this. Next. So Angela Duckworth and I have been doing research on grit now since 2003 at West Point among cadets, and 2 years ago, we published an article in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, summarized over a decade of our work. We had studied over that decade over 11,000 cadets and tracked them cadet by cadet through their 47-month experience at West Point. What we wanted to know was grit, which we define as the passionate pursuit of long-term goals. How do grit, talent as measured by SAT scores, and physical ability as measured by a physical fitness test that cadet candidates take, how do they affect getting through cadet basic training, which we call quitting early, doing well across 47 months in academics, military development, and physical fitness development, and then finishing what you start, that is graduating. So let me just show you quickly, tease you with the data, we'll move on. So next, please. So quitting early, if you're gritty, you're more likely to graduate from, to complete the initial 6 weeks of cadet basic training, which is, just think of military basic training. That's what they're getting, along with indoctrination to West Point. In fact, grit is the only significant predictor of who successfully completes cadet basic training. Doesn't matter what your IQ is, doesn't matter what your SAT score is. When you're cold and hungry and lonely, grit is what matters. And even physical fitness didn't matter a lot. Next slide, please. Now remember, these are validated across 11,000 cadets in 10 years. I know this is an eye chart. Apologize, I couldn't make it any larger. I'm not smart enough or maybe gritty enough to have done that. The middle graph, which shows a straight line, that's cognitive ability. Across 47 months, SAT scores do matter. They're designed to matter. They predict academic course performance better than anything else. Grit adds to that a little bit. Physical ability is pretty much unrelated, but that's as it should be. The people who create the SAT have spent millions of dollars and probably more than that and decades perfecting that test. The top part is military GPA. That's a lot like a academic GPA, same scale, 0 to 4. This is how good the cadets are doing in the military. Their cognitive ability and grit matter the most, but really none of them are like overpoweringly better than the other. And then the last one at the bottom is physical fitness, and no surprise there. And Bob, you might really find this interesting. The cadet fitness assessment, which is pretty simple, taken before they come to West Point, is by far the best predictor of the physical fitness GPA. Next, please. And finally, when it's all said and done, cadets who are higher in grit complete West Point. This is eliminating those not counting those who dropped out before academic terms began in the fall of their first freshman year. Grit is still the most important factor overall to getting through a tough place like West Point. Okay, next, please. So when I talk about West Point, think about tough places you've been in. West Point doesn't hold a patent on being a tough place to work, or to be. Quickly, grit and resilience. I think grit is really important. Resilience for the reasons you see here, just to make it quick and simple. Grit, succeeding, when you succeed at hard tasks, that's rewarding, and it builds self-esteem and sense of self-control. That increases your meaning and purpose, and that in turn makes you even more gritty and more likely to work hard. And there is a growing body of literature which shows that people who are high in grit not just achieve more, they're more resilient to things like pandemics and other setbacks in life. Next. Okay, getting close to the end of my piece. Some of the challenges for the scientists out there, I think a weakness of the status of character science right now is still an over-reliance on questionnaire-based assessments. There may be some other things we can do. Angela's been trying some other things, not ready to talk about those yet. So I would say that the assessments we have now, like the VIA and even the grit measure, good for research, not ready for prime time, not ready for actual selection. For the simple reason is they're just too self-evident. So if we made getting into West Point contingent on scoring high on grit, well, the applicants could read the items and know how to answer. Like to see some more genetics work done. Small coefficients of determination. We predict things reliably, but we don't account for a lot of the variability. And I'd like to see more focus on person-environment interactions. Next, please. Now, real close to the end. So listen, one of the things I used to do for fun, I'm older now, I used to go to Nepal and climb around in the mountains and including up to I did not climb Everest because I like my toes and my fingers and my life too much to do that. I've climbed above base camp a little bit. And phenomenon that you see for those who do go up the peak is they get so focused on making the summit. It's just incredibly challenging, and you're in the hypoxic zone. They call it the death zone above 25,000 feet or so. They frequently come upon people who are literally dying, other climbers who are literally dying, and they walk past them on the way up, and they walk past them on the way down, and nobody helps them. And can you imagine the moral dilemma after the fact? Like, who would do that? These are good people to go to climb the thing if they let people die on the mountain. And I would submit that that's an extreme case of physical exhaustion, of sleep deprivation, hypoxia, and a case where your brain is not right. So using that really wild example, and doesn't affect a lot of people, what other contexts exist, in more day-to-day life where people's brain health is not optimal, which leads to character failures and letdowns? I'll just pose that to the scientist as something and a call for action, a call to arms for more science on brain health and character. Next. Okay, teeing up General Caslen. Again, I'm a pointy-headed scientist. I hope you found some of the stuff that I've said interesting, but you really need to see character as it plays out in real life, high consequence situations that leaders like General Caslen have been in his case, over 45 years. I'll not comment further about things in this slide. I've done work with NVA teams and some teams at West Point, and every single case, character is just, particularly for the leaders, it's essential. My last slide, last comment for everybody is, look, when you see people who win, I love this slide, all you see there's at the top, who finished first, second, or third. You think, boy, aren't they great? Aren't they talented? Aren't they super? And what you don't see underneath, all of those little things that contributed to that, years of discipline, sacrifice, fear and joy and support, pain, doubt, nutrition, sleep, hard work. Okay, there's no one character strength that gets you up on the platform. It is character strength. It's good sleep discipline. It's good nutrition. It's a strong body and a strong mind. And I'll pass the torch on here to Bob. Thank you for your attention.
Well, okay, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate it. And thank you very much, Jennifer, for that amazing introduction. My talk's going to be slightly different from Mike's. I'm not going to have any slides. I'll just tell of my personal story. You might have seen it in the news here this past week. It's really the elephant in the room. And it really is about my resignation of being the president of the University of South Carolina. I had actually earlier said that and even suggested that I not appear tonight, but I still thought it would be insightful, or they thought it would be insightful, at least to share some of the challenges that have occurred that led to that resignation. And if anything, it gives a great story about why character and when it's missing and what are some of the consequences that you see there. So the question I ask myself is, how do you write a book and then fail in the book's caution and then live with the consequences that the book talks about? So briefly, you probably saw the news across the nation of my resignation, as I had said, is from the President of the University of South Carolina, strictly because I had failed to attribute a quote to Admiral McRaven in a commencement talk that I was giving. So real briefly, some of the facts behind this was that, I'm also the president of the South Carolina system. So there's about 15 separate events in the period of about 5 days. And this was the third event that particular day that you're speaking at, all to different audiences. And I had got to a point where what Mike was talking about, grit and stuff like that, we really hadn't talked about the grit and the tenacity and resilience that our students had really demonstrated through the pandemic. And I wanted to applaud them for that. I made the edit and had given it to the person that had the responsibility to put all my talks together. And as we put it in there and it was inserted, it was a complete oversight to attribute it. We were clearly focused on the message, the right message to the right audience. The first time I realized this was not attributed is when I read about it in the news. So the failure to say 4 words, those words are, as Admiral McRaven said. The failure to say those 4 words will change your life. But here's the important point that I want to share with you is that I said it, I owned it. It was my mistake. I took full responsibility. I was not going to lie. I was not going to pass the buck, and I was not going to cover up. It was a mistake and not a deliberate attempt to deceive, but there were so many lessons that were learned to include the consequences of what that got there. The first thing I would share with you, and I'll be glad to take any questions that you have with respect to that, or of course, Mike will take any questions that he has with his presentation as well. But the first responsibility is the importance of a leader to accept responsibility, rather than to lie or make up a story or pass the blame to somebody else. You know, that's what leaders do. They take responsibility normally they take responsibility of all the bad stuff. And whenever the good stuff occurs, they pass that applaud and the success to subordinates. It's not about the leader, it's about the organization. And leaders must take responsibility. There was no good answer, and it was a mistake, and I realized that I had to own it, and I had to take responsibility. The second lesson is, well then, and a lot of people ask me this, is why did you get to a point that you had to resign? And I think this is the most important lesson that I would even share with you that's expressed in the book so often, is that character really is a function of trust and the ability to have trust. Effective leaders must have trust. And if a leader has trust, trust is a function of character and competence. I would say you can be number 1 in your class, but if you fail in character, you fail in leadership, and character will swallow competence anytime. But the character element of leadership and the ability to build trust is so essential. And once this broke in the news and I started to see trust erode with students, and I saw trust erode with faculty, and I saw trust erode with other constituents, and then with the board, when I got to that particular point, I realized that if trust is not there and it cannot be restored, then effective leadership is not available. So this had to be put behind, not necessarily me, it had to be put behind the university, because it's not about me, it's about the university. The university is much bigger than me. And as the story wraps itself around its president and its failures, it's got to get past that, because the university, as I said, is bigger than the president himself. So when trust was evaporating, I felt that was the right thing to do. The other lesson is really interesting, is can trust be restored? And that's an interesting dynamic. And I frankly believe it can be. Not only trust as an individual, but I think trust can be restored in an institution. One of the challenges that we had at West Point is that we had a pretty strict honor code. And in that honor code, you don't lie, cheat, or steal. And if you had a board of your peers and you determined that you failed the honor code, then you had to appear before the superintendent. And the superintendent had to make a decision on whether or not that student would be separated, or if there was other type of sanction that would be put in place. And the first thing I always looked at was, number 1, did they own it and take responsibility? Because if you're going to learn from this mistake, the first thing you got to do is recognize that a mistake was made. If you're in denial, then there's no way you could learn. The second thing we realized was that you had to have reflection and introspection so that you can see where you are as compared to where you need to be, and normally with a mentor to be able to get you there. And we found that those students that went through this honor mentorship program with a mentor, they emerged out of it with strengths of character far better and far stronger than those that never were there in the first place. The metaphor I like to use is that, if you break a bone and the bone heals and heals correctly, the bone where the break occurred is now stronger than the bone itself. So if you have a defect of character and you go through this mentorship program and you have the reflection and introspection to see where you are and then make the necessary changes in your life, then the product that comes out of there is a man or a woman much stronger in character. So I really believe an individual can recover when trust is lost. But it's a consequence of anything. When trust is lost, there are consequences. And that's kind of where I found myself. And that's one of the reasons I did what I did. So I just share with you as candidly as I could. And I think either Mike or Stephen was talking about authenticity. I could not be more transparent about this conversation than I am right now, and having the opportunity to share it with you, mostly because there are some significant lessons of character in this that I thought that I'm learning that I wanted to share with you as well. So Steve or Jennifer, I think it's Jennifer, I'll send it back to you with that and save some time for some questions. Looking forward to them. Thank you.
Thank you, General Caslen. I do think I love it because it is very timely, and but I think just in this country right now, character. One of my first question really, because I think part of your own personal experience, General Caslen, but also on a larger scale is, can you guys talk to the impact of social media on character?
Yeah, I will be glad to talk about it. There's a great book that's out by Marty Dempsey and somebody else called Radical Inclusion. And in that book, they talk about the whole issue of social media as electrons that are bouncing around unaccounted for. And what happens with social media is facts are no longer important. What matters in social media is how many likes you get. And when likes become more important than facts, then the facts become distorted and meaningless. And when facts become distorted, the truth is missing. When the truth is missing, then you have a loss of trust because you don't know what the truth is anymore. So social media gives you this ability to, in a lot of cases, even to be anonymous so that you can use social media to say things and do things with a value set that you would never do in person. And it allows you to live a dichotic value set between what you would do in a personal life and your own time as compared to what you would do in a public life. You know, if you're the leader in the military of America's sons and daughters, you don't have the luxury of turning character on or turning character off. You're going to be a leader 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You don't have the luxury of turning character on or off, or living a life in your private with a set of values that's not consistent with the values that you would lead in your public life. Social media allows you to do that. I really believe it's the ethics of social media is something that must be studied and understood so that we can see what's happening to our society and the impact it has on others. And from personal experience, I can talk about that.
Yeah, Mike, and I'm interested on that score because it really is. We teach, about perspective taking and really leveraging that frontal lobe, your CEO, to weed out facts from what you said is this just ability to just throw flak in the air, and then based on the number of hits, that flak seemingly appears to be truth, and then your own character is at risk because you want to lash back out at that. I mean, Jennifer, maybe you and Mike can talk a little bit about how that really can take hold of that brain CEO and kind of make it disjointed from what you might otherwise be as well.
Well, one of the virtues of a liberal education, whether it's a place like West Point or Berkeley, is to teach people to marshal critical thinking, develop critical thinking skills. And, your work clearly shows that brain health enhances that. But there also has to be some development of those skills along the way in order for them to manifest themselves with that healthy brain. And so in the character strength model, almost really any one of those strengths from almost any one of those 6 moral domains, moral virtues, contribute to that critical thinking. And clearly, love of learning and perspective and curiosity speak directly to critical thinking, but also a sense of fairness and caring about others and being open-minded. So I'm curious, it would be interesting to to conduct research on people whose brains are impaired temporarily or through accident or injury more broadly, and see, do we have the assessments and measures we need to sort of take a picture of their character and see is there any relationship that we can demonstrate scientifically between brain health and character. So there are also cognitive shortcuts that human beings are subject to, which are cognitive shortcuts which distort reality. So latching on to, so these are some of the fallacies that and heuristics that Kahneman and Tversky have talked about in the past. The availability heuristic or the things of that type. It seems to be human nature to latch onto something real sexy and interesting and focus so much on that you discount other information. So maybe we need to do a better job preparing ourselves and others to be critical thinkers. Would be my initial.
I think that, yeah, no, I love that, because I also think, to your point, it's easy with social media. It is so easy to latch on to something that's sexy, but also something that's highly negative. And you're right, like the ability to hide behind. And so our limbic system can just, we get hijacked and we can just go nuts, piling on. And what we've seen is that through our studies, when we teach people how to activate their frontal networks, right, that helps to downregulate that emotional system. So we don't have to be so reactive all the time, but it does take training, because inevitably all of us have had mini or large crises of character when we've been in an argument with somebody, especially somebody that we care deeply about. We say things that we shouldn't say. And we come back to these things saying, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. And I do think that it's interesting to think about how we can be critical thinkers. How do we train that perspective taking, being able to, stop and say, big picture, what's really going on here? Instead of just grabbing onto that shiny thing.
Yeah, one exercise I've done personally is like all of us. I'll see some flashy object on the news, but whether you're a Fox person or something else type of person, that really aggravates me. Gets me spun up. Like that headline gets me spun up. I'll say, oh, wait a minute, let's see what more I can learn about that. And I'll read 4 or 5 different sources and start getting a nuanced view of it. And all of a sudden you realize the reporter or the person who wrote that article is they're only interested in that click, and honestly, I saw that in the coverage of Bob's stuff, and it's like, let's not have a nuanced adult discussion of this. And so teaching people to be critical consumers of information with this new plague of social media, I think is really, really important. Maybe we need in preschool and kindergarten how to manage social media classes. I don't know. It needs to start young.
I know, and you brought up a really good point just about curiosity, because I do think as humans, we just tend to go to the thing that supports our point of view. So if we already have a positive or a negative view of something, we gravitate to those things. And that is one of the beautiful things about media in general. We have lots of different inputs, which can be disastrous. But at the same time, I think, to your point, Dr. Matthews, about being curious enough to seek other points of view and other sides of things. Certainly with General Caslen, it was interesting. I have been reading, I want to read everything I can about General Caslen right now. And in an interesting, curious way about how does, just about leadership. I'm just, for somebody, on my radar, but this curiosity. And I think that that's really important. And this is a question that's come up. I kind of want to give a little bit of context. And the question really was like, how do you train these character strengths if you don't have them? And I just want to preface this by saying that we have often, I think character can be considered, many people may think you either have it or you don't. And you both have spoken to the point that it can be strengthened, it can be improved, it can be enhanced. And a lot of what you were showing through that web and those, the moral virtues on the conceptual model are things that are very much frontal network mediated. And so when you know that you can strengthen those, how do we go about training these things?
Let me jump on that and then let because Bob's got some things he's going to say about how he did it at West Point and other places, but if you keep in mind that you've got 24 character strengths, let's just buy that. Maybe it's 23, maybe it's 26, maybe it's 17, but you've got more than one or two. People have multiple strengths of character, across 21. Some are higher than others. But the good news about that is you have character strengths. And you may not have to greatly enhance your weak ones, but rather learn to leverage your strong ones. So one of the messages, and this is borne out empirically in a number of studies, that you probably can, if you're not real high in transcendence, there are probably some exercises you can do and some practice to boost that a bit. But the biggest return in your time will be taking the values and action inventory of strengths, finding out what your top 5 or 6 strengths are, and hey, those are 5 or 6 strengths. You've got them already. Now, how do I use them? How do I employ them tactically, strategically to make life better? And I'll get Bob's thoughts on that too.
Yeah, no, thanks. One of the challenges we had at West Point, Jennifer, was to develop character. So we developed cadets academically, physically, militarily, and we developed them in character. And of those 4 developmental traits, character we felt was the most important piece of it, because trust is a function of, as I said, character and competence. The other 3 deal with competence. Only character deals with moral attributes that are necessary for effective leadership. So how do you develop character? And we thought a lot about that, and we really relied on Mike Matthews and his colleagues to really walk us through that. But it's quite simple. First of all, it's the education of what are the character traits of the head, of the gut, and the heart. For example, character traits of the gut, the grit, the tenacity, the perseverance, the ability to get in that crucible and to be able to stand and persevere through that sort of thing, not just survive, but thrive within it as well. So all of those character traits are taught, but character doesn't occur until those traits are internalized. So how do you get from being taught to internalized? That's where we really want to do. So after you teach them, then you put cadets into experiential opportunities. And that's what West Point is beautiful for, because they everything they do every single day, every hour of the day is in some sort of military organizational formation. And cadets always have duties and responsibilities. So they're constantly in leadership opportunities or followership opportunities, which is an essential element of leadership in itself. So they get the chance and the opportunity to practice this. Then they all go through constant assessments, and the assessment will rate them by their peers, by their subordinates, it's 360s, and by their superiors on how well they're doing, not only on competence, but also on character issues. And that causes some reflection and introspection. And then each one of the students also have different types of mentors, and the mentor will sit down and walk them through all of that process as well. So the whole idea is to get to, from head knowledge to internalization. And it's like a cup of coffee, so that when you're faced with that compromising situation, you don't have to think about what right or wrong is. Natural reaction will be the value set you have internalized. Because if I'm holding this cup of coffee and someone bumps me in the elbow, it's whatever's in there is going to spill out. And what spills out is going to be really the essence of what your character looks like. So that's that whole developmental process that we really have refined over many years. And it's so tremendously important to put it into place.
Very nice. Steve, yeah.
Yeah, Mike and Bob, I'm curious. I see obviously the analogy to the toolbar I love, because it really is, that's what we teach, right? Get access to that toolbar and start learning how to use your brain better. But what I'm hearing is, what you just said, Bob, is there's this subjective evaluation of your character from your peers, like a 360 evaluation. Has there been any comparison, Mike, between that kind of subjective review, third party, right? Because none of us are good judges of our own character, and how those objective measures you talked about, do you see those syncing up in your data?
We've got just at the end, concluding a 5-year longitudinal study of cadet character at West Point that I've done in collaboration with Dr. Rich Lerner from Tufts University. And given the magnitude of this study, we call it the Project Arete. It's all about good stuff, the good life. And we have the ability to do that. So every cadet gets what's called a PDR, Personal Development Review, I think is what the acronym stands for, where he or she is self-rates on a number of dimensions to include character. It's the 360. So they'll have their immediate supervisor, a cadet supervisor. They'll have their officers in their chain of command, the actual Army officers. They'll have professors rate them. So cadets themselves get to see, the old Army color coded stuff. Are you green? Are you yellow? Are you red? In these areas. And they sit down with key mentors to discuss that. But we have those data. And we then also for each cadet have grit and hardiness and some of the values and action strengths. And I don't believe we've have analyzed that sufficiently to give you a good, strong answer, but we are able to do that and are in the process of doing that. That's an important thing. So I think that delta between ground truth and perception is an important thing to allow young people to diminish that, to really understand how you're being. Now, we did find one interesting study. I'm going to reach across. I've got a note. Hang on a second, because I'll forget part of this. Oh, darn it. Oh, there it is. Typical professor, right? Totally disorganized. We did this content analysis of thousands and thousands of cadets on this assessment of character. And we found, in this particular case, four character sort of uber character, traits that describe cadets, and these included. I'm looking to see if I can find it. Things like honor was one of them. So honor, integrity, social relations. But one of the ones that showed up was Machiavellian, which is not good. And so we would find that, so Machiavellian's in it for the gain only, for self-satisfaction. I'm concerned about not just cadets who are like that, but leaders everywhere. And I would wager that they would be the ones with the biggest delta between what they think they are and how they're perceived by others. And we can tease that out.
There was a question that kind of relates to, or what stereotypically people are asking about folks who occupy Washington and, just politicians in general, right? But I think a good question, like, what steps should we take to focus on supporting character as a society?
I think Bob's got to say that. I'll just tell you that I focus more and more on indicators of character, and it's hard to find a candidate for office we're going through a New York City mayoral campaign now, and they're just so busy slinging mud at each other, just make your head spin, So once again, can you believe what you see in social media? Take it with a grain of salt. But I think about presidents I've served under, either as an officer or as a civilian in the DOD, and I'll say that while I didn't vote for President Reagan, and I thought, I disagreed with him procedurally a lot of stuff. I thought he was a person of great character. In retrospect, I would like Bob says, character will swallow competence or even political views every time. So I think as we employ our cognitive and discriminative powers and perceptual powers, it'd be towards focusing more on the character of the individual and less on specific policies.
Yeah, that isn't a bias.
If I could just add a couple thoughts on that. See, the way I immediately thought about your question was, well, how do you improve character in society? My response is, well, how do you regain trust within different institutions in society? Our government being one of them. And then, of course, trust in other different institutions, to include the military and things like that. So where is that trust, and how is trust gained? How is it lost, and all of those sorts of things? So I'm not a politician. I realize that the president of the university is a hugely political job, which I really hadn't anticipated, but it is what it is. But the facts are, if you're going to build trust, you really have got to have both character and competence in the mix there. And it's not just after a parochial group of people or a parochial position. It's how do you, Stephen, I really enjoyed your comments right up front about transparency and authenticity, because an authentic leader is someone who is transparent. You don't find very many leaders today who are transparent. An authentic leader is also someone that's got a high value set and shares those values. And, people kind of admire that. Most leaders today will just keep their cards close to their chest, and they're not going to be transparent, and that you're not inclusive, and everybody starts these rumors, and you start doubting each other. And social media, Jennifer, as you said, just plays into that. And so many different ways. And next thing you know, you have some challenges of a leader just trying to build some trust. But if you're going to build character, you got to build trust, I think, because ultimately we want to be able to trust our leaders and trust our institutions. And the leaders have got to be able to earn trust. The interesting thing about trust doesn't happen automatically just because you're the leader. Trust is something that has to be earned. And it's probably more fragile, and you can lose it a lot easier than what it takes to earn it.
Hey, Jen, I want to ask you, since you've been doing this now for over 20 years, I know people won't believe that looking at you, but you have been. And Mike, I want to ask you and Bob, do y'all see trends that, whether it's social media, other things, do we see a general uplift or a decline in character? Do you have any basis to determine whether we're losing a little bit of our character, maybe because of some of these battles we're having and this inability to disagree with honor, right? I mean, we've lost the art of disagreement without picking a fight. Do you see any trends in your research where character or those kinds of measures are either on a general growth or decline or have stayed the same?
Our x-axis doesn't go back far enough, in terms of quantified data. I can only speculate. Knowing a lot about human nature and so forth, I would speculate that we are probably not a lot worse than we were 100 years ago or 200 years ago. It's just easier to know about it. And as I remember reading the book Team of Rivals about Lincoln and some of the horrible encounters that occurred in Congress back in those days prior to the Civil War, duels and fist fights and people beaten half to death. We're actually better than the Congress in the 1850s. So maybe there's some progress behaviorally, if not in terms of character. I think it's more of an issue. I hope it's just more of an issue of, any person with an idea has a platform now, and here's their platform, right? It's just, you can get on here and communicate to the world whatever your personal view of things are. And then we haven't figured out, the rest of us have figured out how to process that information in a sensible way and so forth. So I'm not sure. I'm not convinced we're any worse than we were before, but the effects are worse. Because
I'll piggyback what Mike is saying, Stephen, and that, quite frankly, is that social media today allows a value set, particularly when you're in the anonymity. It allows a value set totally different from what you would do in your public life or in another life. And when you're living this dichotomy of values, what you do in private is totally different what you're going to do in public. It just allows you to stalk people, to bully people, to do all those hideous things that you hear about and see. And many of us have been victimized of that stuff. And we all know and we talk about mental health and talk about brain health. When you're bullied relentlessly on social media by someone on anonymity, and you're being stalked as well, and social media allows that behavior, and it's unaccounted for. And that is a trend that's occurring in our society that, in my opinion, is something that we've really got to take hold of and try to understand the impact of. When you talk about mental health and brain health, it is right in the heart, in the middle of that.
Yeah, it's just not eighth graders. It's not just eighth graders who get bullied.
That is a true statement. I see we're getting near the end of time, Jen and Catherine. I want to give you time to tee up our final slide, but do you have one more question, Jen, to ask of our distinguished guest before we let the crowd head off into the ether?
Yes, there are lots of good, really, really good questions. Yeah. So apologies to everyone whose question we didn't get to. I think Sandy, do you have a question?
I don't have a question, but I just want to make a closing comment because of General General Caslen and Mike Matthews mean so much to us. And Bill McRaven, Admiral McRaven, is so close to us as our national spokesperson. And I reached out to him and I said, what would you like to tell the audience tonight? General Caslen is speaking to us. And he said, tell them he is one of the most respected generals of full character I've ever met. And I couldn't think of anyone. I'm glad he found a good way to use my words to inspire people, because he inspired me. And so I want just the sharing from the heart and the courage it takes to do that, to face it, gives me a lesson in character. And tomorrow, I hope I have grown from tonight to show more character from your sharing and the pain you share, that we can be forth. I know some of the questions were about why do good leaders have to go away with things that, we don't know. And part of that, I think some people were bringing up Lincoln and Washington and the solitude that comes from those times of pain. And I suspect something great's going to come from General Caslen and Mike Matthews. And I'm hoping maybe he'll come to Dallas and be with us. I'm like, why are you moving to Florida? So we love people that, the potholes, as you call them in your book, Mike, and thank you guys for both an amazing book. Everyone should buy the book, share your stories of character and where we have been wounded ourselves, and let's, support each other more so that we can learn rather than be penalized to be the best as possible. But I just want to thank you from Brain Health to share your stories. So from the gut, the brain, and the heart, I'm inspired.
Thank you, Sandy.
Absolutely. And I just want to remind everyone that's on that, listen, we can't do these sorts of things without your help and support. We are a not-for-profit here at the Center for Brain Health. And we used to be a little bit apologetic when we said that, but we're not apologetic anymore. So if you find this of value, please look on our website and see how you can support us. We're all about unlocking human potential with improved brain health and performance. And our most important initiative is the Brain Health Project. And much like Mike was talking about on these longitudinal studies, we are going to be studying hundreds of thousands of people and their brains and all of these different attributes that go with it. And why? It's to elevate us all. It's about better brain, better life, better world. And again, I don't apologize for that statement, because I think when we latch on to that most important asset, we all can be better and should be better. We can learn how to disagree and still be friends. So please go to thebrainhealthproject.org if you're looking for ways to help us. And I can't thank Bob and Mike and Jen enough. You three are all great leaders. We love having you as part of the team, right? When Sadie started saying move to Dallas, she did it to me. I moved from San Diego. Now I'm in Dallas. So it can happen, Bob. Don't doubt her force of will. So thank you all for joining us tonight. And thank you, Bob, and thank you, Mike.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.